Are you ready, love? Daniel asked me as we stood behind the satin curtain, ready to make our entrance into the hall full of expectant faces. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, trying to control the flutter of butterflies in my stomach. The curtain parted, and as we stepped into the sea of guests, flowers, and glistening chandeliers, I felt a surreal happiness wrap around me. There was a dizzying scent of roses, a musical hum of well-wishers, and at the center of it all was us, Daniel and me. We were a moment frozen in time, two people pledging their love for a lifetime to come. While most of the eyes in the room radiated warmth and love, I could feel one pair burning holes into me, those of Carol, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. She looked impeccable in her designer gown, but her face was twisted into an expression that seemed more appropriate for a funeral than a wedding. Daniel seemed to notice my discomfort and whispered, "Ignore her, Mia. Today is about us. You look stunning, by the way." "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my focus on the joyous occasion. We had carefully planned every little detail, from the velvet drapes to the sparkling wine, and I wasn't about to let Carol ruin it for me. As we proceeded with the rituals and vows, I noticed Carol repeatedly whispering to Richard, my soon-to-be father-in-law. Richard was the polar opposite of Carol, exuding warmth and affection. He would nod at Carol's murmurs, then give her a gentle pat on the hand, as if assuring her to keep her peace. During a quiet moment, I caught snippets of their conversation. Carol was saying, "Richard, are you sure she's the right one for our son? Don't you think he deserves someone more compatible with our status?" "Carol, for heaven's sake!" Richard replied, low enough so only she could hear. "This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. Look at them, they're happy. And that's what matters. Daniel's happiness is what should matter to us. Let's not taint this special day with baseless concerns." Despite the intense emotional undercurrents, the ceremony went on without any public incidents. We exchanged rings, said our vows, and sealed our marriage with a kiss. As the applause erupted around us, I looked at Daniel, his eyes brimming with love and promises of a better tomorrow. At that moment, I felt invincible, like we could face any obstacle, endure any hardship, as long as we were together. Carol managed to paste a smile on her face as we walked down the aisle as husband and wife, but her eyes told a different story. A story I knew we'd have to confront someday, but not today. Today was about love, commitment, and new beginnings. And as we exited the venue, showered by a cloud of rose petals, I held onto Daniel and thought of our life ahead, willing myself to focus on the happiness that beckoned and not the storm clouds that threatened, on the horizon. The euphoria of the wedding quickly gave way to the reality of married life. Daniel and I settled into his family's grand estate, a beautiful mansion with a long driveway and opulent interiors. It was a bit intimidating, to be honest. Daniel's family had a history of successful business ventures, and their house reflected that success in every corner. Antique vases, priceless artwork, a library that seemed like it was from a movie set. It was all a bit overwhelming. But what felt even more overwhelming was the shift I noticed in Daniel. He became increasingly restless and stressed. He was immersed in work, but not in a way that signified passion or drive. It was more like he was trapped, shackled to a role he never auditioned for. One evening, he came home looking particularly defeated. I could tell it was one of those days. The dark circles under his eyes spoke volumes. I had prepared a special dinner, thinking it might lift his spirits. We sat across from each other at the dining table, surrounded by the ornate decorations of his family home, a setting that somehow made our simple, homemade meal look out of place. "Maya, I need to talk to you about something," Daniel started, pushing his food around his plate. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Daniel sighed deeply. "I've been thinking a lot about my role in the company, and the more I think about it, the more I realize that I'm not cut out for this. I've been miserable, Mia, and it's not fair to either of us." I looked into his eyes and could see the battle he was fighting within himself. "Daniel, if you're not happy, something needs to change. We can figure this out. What would make you happy? Have you thought about that?" He paused for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I love art, Mia. Always have. I always thought that someday I'd have my own gallery or be an art curator or something along those lines. But family expectations weighed me down, and I just went along with it. With Dad's health declining, it felt like I didn't have a choice." The tension seemed to lift slightly as he talked about his real passions. "Daniel, you always have a choice. It's your life, and you have the right to pursue what makes you happy. You're not bound to fulfill anyone's expectations at the cost of your own happiness." He looked at me, almost as if he was seeing me in a new light. "Would you support me, even if it means stepping away from all this?" He gestured around the room, indicating not just the physical space, but the weight of the legacy it represented. "Absolutely," I said, without a second thought. "I married you, not the company, not this house, and certainly not a role you've been pushed into. I love you for who you are, Daniel, and I'd rather have a happy husband than a miserable executive." For the first time in weeks, I saw a genuine smile spread across his face. It felt like a small victory, but I knew it was only the beginning. We were about to embark on a new chapter in our lives, one that would require courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to battle the ghosts of expectations and family obligations. But as I looked at Daniel, I realized something crucial. We were in this together. Whatever came our way, we would face it side by side, and that realization made all the difference in the world. It was a month later when the situation began to change again. Daniel's father, Richard, had been hospitalized due to a mild stroke. The weight of his rapidly deteriorating health and the future of the company suddenly made the air at home thick with tension. "Daniel, your father wants to see us," Carol announced one day, her tone more serious than usual. We both knew what this was about. Richard wanted to secure the future of the company, and with his health failing, the pressure on Daniel was intensifying. Daniel looked at me with that familiar anguish in his eyes. It was a look that spoke 1,000 words, most of them questions neither of us had answers to. The next day, we went to see Richard at the hospital. He was lying there, frail and pale, but his eyes still sparkled with the same determination I'd come to respect. "Daniel, I think it's time we seriously discuss the future of the company. I won't be around forever," he began. "Dad, don't talk like that," Daniel interjected. "No, listen. I need to know that it's in capable hands." Daniel looked down, struggling with his words. "Dad, I don't think I'm cut out for it. I know it's hard to hear, but running the company just doesn't align with who I am. I'm an artist at heart." Richard sighed. "I had hoped you'd grow into it, son." It was then that I felt a conviction rise within me. "Richard, if it's all right, I'd like to help. I've always had an interest in business. Why don't I join the company for a while? I can support Daniel and take some load off him. We can be a team." Both men looked surprised. Richard broke into a smile first. "Maya, that's a generous offer. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. And so, it began. I started to work at the company, initially shadowing Daniel to understand the intricacies of the operation. I took to it like a fish to water. My background in organizational psychology seemed to give me an edge in understanding team dynamics and improving operational efficiency. I began to make small changes, streamlining processes and increasing productivity. People started to take notice, and even the skeptical board members couldn't ignore the positive impact I was having. "Mia, you've been doing an excellent job," Richard said to me a few weeks later during an informal review meeting. "You're a natural leader. I'm not afraid for the company if Daniel has you by his side." "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot," I responded, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over me. "You're doing far better than I ever did when I started," Daniel admitted one evening, his words tinged with both pride and a dash of sadness. "You belong there, Maya. You've brought a kind of positive energy that was missing for a long time." "It's not just me," I told him. "It's us. We're a team, remember? Besides, you've got your art classes now. We're both getting closer to where we want to be." "Yes, but you're carrying the heavier load and doing it with grace," Daniel insisted. As I looked back at the whirlwind of the past few months, I realized that sometimes life forces you down a path you never planned to take, and sometimes that unplanned path reveals a part of you that you never knew existed. It was challenging, yes, but also invigorating. But little did I know that this was just the prelude to a much larger storm that was about to hit us, a storm that would test the very fabric of our marriage and family. Just as we were settling into our new roles, life threw us another curveball. Richard suffered a severe stroke, one that left him incapacitated and with a grim prognosis. The urgency to discuss the future leadership of the company suddenly became a pressing matter, and this time it couldn't be postponed or glossed over. It was a gloomy afternoon when we received the news, and Daniel's face turned pale as the phone call ended. "He's had another stroke, Mia. It's bad this time. They're not sure if he's going to make it." We rushed to the hospital, where Carol was already sitting in a tired slump, her eyes red from crying. Seeing Richard lying there, connected to machines that beeped and hummed unnervingly, was a reality check for all of us. He seemed so fragile, a stark contrast to the strong, resilient man I had come to know. When Richard regained consciousness, he asked to speak to Daniel alone. I stepped out of the room, giving them the privacy they needed for what I knew would be a heart-wrenching conversation. After what seemed like an eternity, Daniel emerged, his face a mix of relief and trepidation. Dad said he wants me to try running the company. He believes it's time for me to step up and take responsibility. He doesn't think he has much time left. I hugged him tightly. Are you okay with that? With taking over, I mean? He sighed deeply. I want to be there for him, Maya. So, Daniel took over the reins of the company. However, his heart wasn't in it. It quickly became apparent that despite his best efforts, he couldn't handle the pressure and intricacies of managing a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Deadlines were missed, meetings ran over time with no resolutions, and employee morale took a nosedive. Finally, Daniel admitted defeat. I can't do this, Maya. I'm failing, and I'm afraid I'll run the company into the ground. I thought I could do it for Dad, but it's crystal clear that I'm not cut out for this. It was one of those defining moments in life where you realize that stepping up doesn't always mean taking control. Sometimes it means letting go for the greater good. Daniel, you tried your best, and that's all anyone could ask for. But if you're not the right person for this job, it's okay to admit it. Your father will understand. What's important now is what we do next. I knew what I had to do. Let me take over the day-to-day operations. I've been doing well so far, and I think I can help turn things around. I'll be the acting manager until we figure out a long-term solution. Daniel looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Are you sure, Mia? It's a huge responsibility. I know it is, but it's one I'm willing to take for both of us. You've supported me in everything. Now it's my turn to support you. So, I stepped in and took over. It was challenging, but I felt an adrenaline rush as I navigated through the chaos. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. I reorganized the staff, reallocated resources, and managed to meet the pending deadlines. Within weeks, the atmosphere in the office changed. It was then that Daniel came up to me, his eyes shining with pride. You've saved us, Mia. I can't thank you enough. You deserve this position more than I ever did. I did what I had to do, I said, smiling. Besides, we're a team, remember? Little did I know that this would lead to an even bigger responsibility and set the stage for conflicts I had never anticipated. But in that moment, all that mattered was that we had overcome a challenge, and we had done it together. It felt like a victory, not just for me, but for us as a couple. It solidified my belief that together, we were stronger than the sum of our parts. Richard's health continued to deteriorate, and within a few weeks, the inevitable happened. He passed away in the early hours of a cold morning, leaving us all devastated but somewhat prepared for the emotional blow. The company held a small memorial to honor him, and the genuine sorrow in the eyes of the employees showed just how much he had been respected. We started planning the funeral, and Daniel looked like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I can't believe he's gone, Mia. I feel like I failed him in so many ways. You didn't fail him, Daniel, I reassured him. You were a good son, and he knew that. He was proud of you for who you are, not what you could do for him. As we were going through Richard's personal belongings to find photographs for the memorial service, Daniel found an envelope addressed to him. It was thick and appeared to contain more than just a sheet or two. With trembling hands, he opened it and began to read. It's a letter from Dad. He wrote that he was proud of me and that he always wanted me to find my own path in life. And then, well, look at this. He handed me another piece of paper. It was a legal document, a will, to be exact, and it had my name on it. Richard had transferred the ownership of the company to me. I can't believe it, I said, shocked and emotional. Why would he do this? Because he saw in you what I've always seen, a strong, capable woman who can lead and make a difference. He wrote here that he had been planning to discuss this with us, but ran out of time, Daniel explained. Just then, Carol entered the room. What's going on here? Why are you two looking so emotional? Daniel showed her the will. For a moment, she looked stunned, and then her face turned into a mask of fury. You can't be serious. Richard left the company to her. Mom, calm down, Daniel intervened. Dad knew what he was doing. He saw that I wasn't fit to lead the company, and Maya was. He made his choice. This is outrageous, Carol exploded. She marries into our family, and suddenly she owns our legacy. Over my dead body. Ignoring her outburst, Daniel turned to me. Maya, do you want to take on this role? It's your choice. I took a deep breath. Yes, I do. For the company, for us, and to honor your father's last wishes. Then it's settled, Daniel said firmly, shooting a warning glance at his mother. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the air seemed to be filled with unspoken words and veiled threats. I knew that accepting Richard's legacy would change the dynamics of our family forever, and probably not for the better. But it was a responsibility I was willing to accept, even if it meant dealing with Carol's wrath. It was an emotional and tumultuous period, yet it was also a turning point for me, both personally and professionally. I had been given an enormous responsibility, one that came with its own set of challenges and complications. But in that moment, holding that piece of paper that signified Richard's faith in me, I felt empowered to rise to the occasion, no matter what lay ahead. The day of Richard's funeral arrived, thick with an air of mourning, but also laden with tension. It was an elaborate affair, a fitting send-off for a man of his stature. Colleagues, friends, and family came to pay their respects. I had hoped that the solemnity of the occasion would put a temporary halt to family disputes. I couldn't have been more wrong. As we stood around the casket, each lost in our memories and sorrow, Carol stepped forward. Her eyes were red, but not from sorrow alone. It was a look I had come to recognize. A cauldron of rage about to boil over. "You don't belong here," she hissed at me as she passed by. "Mom, not now," Daniel warned. Ignoring him, she raised her voice so everyone could hear. "This woman has bewitched you all. She's pulled the wool over Richard's eyes, manipulated him on his deathbed to take over our family's company." The mourners exchanged awkward glances, their discomfort palpable. Daniel, with a look of deep hurt and betrayal, took a step toward his mother. "Mom, how dare you ruin Dad's funeral with baseless accusations against Mia?" Carol's face was unyielding. "It's the truth, and everyone here should know it." I had remained silent, absorbing her insults like punches, but I couldn't hold back any longer. "Carol, you claim to care about family, about legacy, yet here you are, tearing it apart. Your own son didn't want to run the company, and Richard knew that. You and Richard were so fixated on what you thought Daniel should be that you never bothered to ask him what he actually wanted." Carol's eyes widened. She seemed momentarily lost for words. "Your son has his own dreams, and I've seen him come alive like never before when he talks about them. How could you ignore that? How could you ignore that? How could you both have been so blind to your own son's happiness?" I continued. Daniel nodded at me, his eyes filled with gratitude, and then turned to Carol. "Mia's right, Mom. All these years, you and Dad wanted me to fit into a mold, never realizing that it was suffocating me. And for your information," I added, pulling out a folded copy of Richard's handwritten letter from my purse, "Richard wasn't manipulated. This was his decision, one he regretted not discussing with us earlier." Carol glanced at the letter and then back at me, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaky. I didn't know." "Perhaps it's time you started knowing, Carol. Knowing your son, and recognizing that the walls you've built to protect this family are the same walls that are now tearing it apart," I said. Carol looked from me to Daniel, her gaze softening for just a moment before she turned and walked away. The crowd, which had been watching this family drama unfold, slowly began to disperse, leaving us standing there in a thick, uncomfortable silence. "I'm sorry, Mia," Daniel said softly, "for all of this." I hugged him tightly. "It's not your fault. Families are complicated, but we'll get through this, just like we've gotten through everything else. Together." As I stood there, nestled in the arms of the man I loved, staring at the wooden casket that held a man who had become like a second father to me, I was filled with a mixture of sorrow, relief, and determination. Sorrow for the loss of Richard, relief for speaking my truth, and a newfound determination to honor Richard's legacy in a way that would make both him and Daniel proud. Despite the ugliness of the day, it felt like a new beginning. For the company, for Daniel, and even for Carol, who would have to come to terms with the changing dynamics, whether she liked it or not.